Yes, that brings us to me. I'm using my TV screen as my visual aid. It's a book, because I'm going to talk about reading fiction every day. So, when we were young, stories feel like magic. They're like doorways with lanterns and secret maps, and they teach us how to be brave before we ever face anything frightening. But somewhere along the way, between the bills and deadlines, and don't forget little Johnny's soccer game at 3, many of us quietly close those doors and we tell ourselves we just don't have time for stories anymore. And so we trade in wonder for efficiency and imagination for practicality. And we forget that the human mind was built on stories, but long before it was built on schedules. But here's the truth: adults need stories just as much as children do. And not just any stories, the deep ones, the myth-shaped ones, um, the ones that remind us of who we are and who we could be. So I'm talking about high fantasy, that kind of mythopoetic storytelling that Tolkien pioneered. So it offers us a rare space to explore courage and loss and hope, all in symbolic form. And today, I want to persuade you that adults should read fiction regularly because it strengthens our minds, steadies our emotions, and deepens our empathy in ways that nothing else really can. And so, first, fiction strengthens the adult mind. Modern research backs this up. In 2012, Stanford University found that reading literary fiction actually activates the complex neural networks that are responsible for attention and reasoning and critical thinking. So it's like weight training for the brain, but with dragons. And then there was a study published in Neurology in 2013, and it showed that people who are regular readers, the slower, they have less cognitive decline as they age. So it means that reading isn't just entertainment; it's actually long-term health care for your brain. And high fantasy, that's like mental cross training. So you follow the histories of Middle Earth, track the languages, and hold threads of a sprawling quest in your mind. You're exercising memory and logic and pattern recognition, and you're doing it all at once. So you're not just reading, you're navigating an entire world. And that's one thing that people tend to forget because adults rarely get opportunities to practice imagination. Kids, they do it all the time, constantly. Adults, we practice efficiency, and that's usually with a spreadsheet. But imagination, it's a cognitive skill. And like any skill, it weakens without use. High fantasy, it keeps that part of our mind alive. It's that part that can envision possibilities, solve problems creatively, and think beyond the obvious. And so fiction sharpens the mind, but it also does something quieter and maybe even more important. Fiction strengthens emotional well being. So in 2021, a study in Frontiers in Psychology by Mars and Company found that adults who read fiction experience reduced stress levels and improved emotional regulation. At the University in Sussex in 2009, Lewis discovered that reading for just 6 minutes can reduce stress by up to 68%. 6 minutes. So it's less time than it takes to doom spiral an ad on social media. And high fantasy offers emotional nourishment in a unique way. So when we're walking beside characters who face darkness, loss, impossible odds, and they still choose courage, it reminds us that resilience is possible even in our own lives. So with Frodo's perseverance and Sam's loyalty, we've got Aragorn's reluctant leadership. They're not just plot points, they're emotional mirrors. And there's something healing about stepping into a world where hope is allowed to be epic, where good and evil aren't just abstract concepts, but actual living forces, where ordinary people, even hobbits, can carry impossible burdens and still keep going. High fantasy gives us emotional rehearsal space, lets us practice bravery in symbolic form, so we can choose it for ourselves later on. And honestly, adults don't get many places where we can just safely feel awe, and fiction gives us that. It gives us a moment to breathe, to feel, and to reconnect with the parts of ourselves we set aside just to survive everyday life. But fiction doesn't just change how we feel, it changes how we feel and understand each other. Because, third of all, fiction deepens empathy and social understanding. So there's a landmark study by Kidd and Castano, and it was published in Science in 2013, and it found that reading literary fiction improves theory of mind, which is our ability to understand thoughts and emotions in others. So, in other words, fiction literally trains us to be better humans. So, when we inhabit the inner worlds of characters, like their doubts, their griefs, and their triumphs, we're practicing empathy. We learn to see through eyes that are not our own. And high fantasy, with its sweeping moral landscapes and diverse peoples, it gives us a mythical stage on which to explore compassion. Tolkien's work, for example, is full of lessons about mercy, fellowship, and the quiet heroism of ordinary people. These stories remind us that empathy is not weakness, it's strength. And there's something subtle but powerful, because fantasy often shows us the consequences of choices across generations, cultures, and even histories. And it teaches us to think beyond ourselves, to imagine the long arc of actions, and understand that small kindnesses and even small cruelties can have a outward ripple. In a world that feels increasingly divided, fiction becomes a bridge, kind of a softening. And it's a reminder that every person carries a story that we sometimes just don't see. So let's return to where we began, those doors that we closed when we grew up. Today, I've shown you that adults should read fiction regularly because it strengthens cognitive abilities, improves emotional well-being, and deepens empathy. But beyond the research, here's the deeper truth. Stories are how humans make sense of the world. They always have been. They're how we pass down wisdom, how we imagine better futures, and how we remember that even in darkness, there is light. Tolkien once wrote that the world is indeed full of peril, and in it there's much darkness, but still there's much that is fair. Fiction helps us see the fair parts again. And maybe that's the real reason adults should read fiction, because it reconnects us to the parts of ourselves we thought we'd outgrown. The brave parts, the curious parts, the hopeful parts. Reading fiction isn't an escape from reality. It's a way to return to it, wiser, calmer, and more human. And maybe, just maybe, it's a way to keep a little magic alive. Thank you.